Marcus had survived countless dangerous situations in the wilderness by staying calm and thinking 3 moves ahead. When a mother grizzly had cornered him near Salmon Creek 2 years ago, he'd slowly backed away while identifying potential weapons and escape routes. When an unexpected avalanche had nearly buried him on Mount Shasta, he'd conserved oxygen and systematically dug his way out. The key was never to panic, never to let emotion override logic. But as Sarah began to change before his eyes, logic itself seemed to be breaking down. Her skin rippled like water, revealing glimpses of something metallic underneath. Her 2 perfect features shifted and flowed as if her entire appearance was nothing more than an elaborate mask. When she flexed her fingers, Marcus saw that her nails had become curved talons that gleamed like polished steel. "Your species has such limited perception," Sarah said, her voice taking on strange harmonic overtones. "You see only what your primitive brains expect to see." It made infiltration remarkably easy. Despite his terror, Marcus found himself analyzing the situation with professional detachment. She was revealing herself, which meant she no longer cared about maintaining her disguise. That suggested either supreme confidence or a fundamental change in her mission parameters. Neither option was encouraging. "How many of you are there?" Marcus asked, taking another careful step backward toward a cluster of large boulders that might provide cover. "Enough," Sarah replied. "We have scouts in every major population center on your planet. We've been studying your military capabilities, your social structures, your psychological weaknesses. The evaluation period is nearly complete." Marcus's mind raced. If this was true, if there really were alien infiltrators throughout human civilization, then he wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He might be humanity's only warning of an impending invasion. "Why reveal yourself to me?" he asked. "Why not just let me think you were a lost hiker?" Sarah tilted her head again, and Marcus realized the gesture wasn't quite human either. It was too precise, too mechanical. "Because I require field data on human stress responses under extreme circumstances. My superiors want to know how your kind reacts when faced with overwhelming superior force. Will you fight uselessly? Will you beg? Will you break down completely?" The clinical detachment in her voice chilled Marcus more than her physical transformation. To her, he wasn't even a person. He was a test subject. "I hate to disappoint you," Marcus said, "but you're not the scariest thing I've faced in these woods." It wasn't entirely true, but he said it with enough conviction that Sarah paused, her alien features shifting into what might have been curiosity. "Explain." Marcus gestured toward the surrounding forest. 3 years ago, I tracked a wounded cougar through this exact area for 6 hours. It had been shot by poachers but not killed, and a wounded big cat is about as dangerous as nature gets. I found it right where you're standing now, half dead but still ready to fight." He was moving as he spoke, using hand gestures to mask his gradual repositioning toward the boulder field. Sarah seemed genuinely interested in his story, which bought him precious seconds. "The thing about predators," Marcus continued, "is that they understand respect. That cougar and I stared at each other for maybe 30 seconds, and we both knew what we were dealing with. I wasn't prey to be hunted. I was another predator in its territory. So we worked out a deal." "A deal?" Sarah's voice carried what might have been amusement. I backed away slowly, giving it space to retreat with dignity. It took the offer and disappeared into the brush. We both got to walk away alive. Marcus reached the first large boulder and casually placed his hand on its rough surface. "The difference between you and that cougar is that the cougar had respect." "And you believe you deserve mine?" Sarah asked. "I think you're making the same mistake every invading species makes," Marcus replied. "You're looking at us and seeing primitive technology, political divisions, individual weaknesses. You're not seeing what makes us dangerous." Sarah laughed again, that sound like breaking glass, but there was an edge to it now. "And what might that be? We're the species that took a planet full of creatures bigger, stronger, and more naturally armed than us and made them all either extinct or afraid of us. We're the species that looked at the sky and decided we belonged there too. We're the species that split the atom just to see what would happen." Marcus shifted his weight, feeling the comforting solidity of the boulder at his back. He'd fought his way out of worse situations than this. Maybe not against alien technology, but the principle remained the same. Find an advantage and exploit it ruthlessly. "Your confidence is admirable, but misplaced," Sarah said, taking a step toward him. As she moved, her form continued to shift and change. She was taller now, at least 7 feet, and her limbs had elongated in ways that defied human anatomy. We have observed your kind for decades. Your weapons, your tactics, your strategies, all have been analyzed and countered. Have you analyzed this? Marcus asked, and lunged sideways behind the boulder just as Sarah sprang forward with inhuman speed. Her claws raked across granite where his head had been a split second before, sending sparks flying. Marcus heard a sound like tearing metal and realized she was strong enough to actually damage solid rock. Clever, came her voice from the other side of the boulder, now carrying a distinctly predatory tone, but pointless. You merely delay the inevitable. Marcus pressed his back against the stone and quickly took inventory of his equipment. Standard ranger gear, first aid kit, emergency flares, water purification tablets, length of paracord, folding knife, fire starter, compass, emergency whistle, and his backup radio. Nothing that would be effective against what amounted to an alien killing machine. But Marcus had spent years teaching wilderness survival, and the first rule was simple: work with what you have, not what you wish you had. You said you've been studying us for decades, Marcus called out, trying to pinpoint her location by the sound of her voice. Did your research include any humans who actually fought back? Your military forces? Yes, extensively. We are prepared for your projectile weapons, your explosive devices, your electronic warfare capabilities. Marcus smiled grimly. She was thinking like a technologist, focusing on hardware and organized forces. That was exactly the kind of narrow thinking that had gotten invasion forces in trouble throughout human history. I wasn't talking about the military, Marcus said, pulling out his paracord and quickly fashioning a slipknot. I was talking about individuals. People with nothing left to lose and no rules to follow. There was silence from the other side of the boulder, and Marcus realized he'd surprised her. Good. Surprise was a weapon he could use. Your individual humans are physically weak and poorly armed, Sarah said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. Yeah, Marcus agreed, testing the strength of his improvised snare. We're also completely unpredictable, irrationally stubborn, and creative in ways that apparently don't translate across species. He heard movement and tensed, ready to spring. Whatever happened next, he was going to make sure Sarah went back to her superiors with a very different report than the one she'd planned to write. Marcus had survived countless dangerous situations in the wilderness by staying calm and thinking 3 moves ahead. When a mother grizzly had cornered him near Salmon Creek 2 years ago, he'd slowly backed away while identifying potential weapons and escape routes. When an unexpected avalanche had nearly buried him on Mount Shasta, he'd conserved oxygen and systematically dug his way out. The key was never to panic, never to let emotion override logic. But as Sarah began to change before his eyes, logic itself seemed to be breaking down. Her skin rippled like water, revealing glimpses of something metallic underneath. Her 2 perfect features shifted and flowed, as if her entire appearance was nothing more than an elaborate mask. When she flexed her fingers, Marcus saw that her nails had become curved talons that gleamed like polished steel. Your species has such limited perception, Sarah said, her voice taking on strange harmonic overtones. You see only what your primitive brains expect to see. It made infiltration remarkably easy. Despite his terror, Marcus found himself analyzing the situation with professional detachment. She was revealing herself, which meant she no longer cared about maintaining her disguise. That suggested either supreme confidence or a fundamental change in her mission parameters. Neither option was encouraging. How many of you are there? Marcus asked, taking another careful step backward toward a cluster of large boulders that might provide cover. Enough, Sarah replied. We have scouts in every major population center on your planet. We've been studying your military capabilities, your social structures, your psychological weaknesses. The evaluation period is nearly complete. Marcus's mind raced. If this was true, if there really were alien infiltrators throughout human civilization, then he wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He might be humanity's only warning of an impending invasion. Why reveal yourself to me? He asked. Why not just let me think you were a lost hiker? Sarah tilted her head again, and Marcus realized the gesture wasn't quite human either. It was too precise, too mechanical. Because I require field data on human stress responses under extreme circumstances. My superiors want to know how your kind reacts when faced with overwhelming superior force. Will you fight uselessly? Will you beg? Will you break down completely? The clinical detachment in her voice chilled Marcus more than her physical transformation. To her, he wasn't even a person. He was a test subject. I hate to disappoint you, Marcus said, but you're not the scariest thing I've faced in these woods. It wasn't entirely true, but he said it with enough conviction that Sarah paused, her alien features shifting into what might have been curiosity. Explain. Marcus gestured toward the surrounding forest. 3 years ago, I tracked a wounded cougar through this exact area for 6 hours. It had been shot by poachers but not killed. And a wounded big cat is about as dangerous as nature gets. I found it right where you're standing now, half dead but still ready to fight. He was moving as he spoke, using hand gestures to mask his gradual repositioning toward the boulder field. Sarah seemed genuinely interested in his story, which bought him precious seconds. The thing about predators, Marcus continued, is that they understand respect. That cougar and I stared at each other for maybe 30 seconds, and we both knew what we were dealing with. I wasn't prey to be hunted. I was another predator in its territory. So we worked out a deal. A deal? Sarah's voice carried what might have been amusement. I backed away slowly, giving it space to retreat with dignity. It took the offer and disappeared into the brush. We both got to walk away alive. Marcus reached the first large boulder and casually placed his hand on its rough surface. The difference between you and that cougar is that the cougar had respect. And you believe you deserve mine? Sarah asked. I think you're making the same mistake every invading species makes, Marcus replied. You're looking at us and seeing primitive technology, political divisions, individual weaknesses. You're not seeing what makes us dangerous? Sarah laughed again, that sound like breaking glass, but there was an edge to it now. And what might that be? We're the species that took a planet full of creatures bigger, stronger, and more naturally armed than us, and made them all either extinct or afraid of us. We're the species that looked at the sky and decided we belonged there too. We're the species that split the atom just to see what would happen. Marcus shifted his weight, feeling the comforting solidity of the boulder at his back. He'd fought his way out of worse situations than this. Maybe not against alien technology, but the principle remained the same. Find an advantage and exploit it ruthlessly. Your confidence is admirable but misplaced, Sarah said, taking a step toward him. As she moved, her form continued to shift and change. She was taller now, at least 7 feet, and her limbs had elongated in ways that defied human anatomy. We have observed your kind for decades. Your weapons, your tactics, your strategies, all have been analyzed and countered. Have you analyzed this? Marcus asked, and lunged sideways behind the boulder just as Sarah sprang forward with inhuman speed. Her claws raked across granite where his head had been a split second before, sending sparks flying. Marcus heard a sound like tearing metal and realized she was strong enough to actually damage solid rock. Clever, came her voice from the other side of the boulder, now carrying a distinctly predatory tone, but pointless. You merely delay the inevitable. Marcus pressed his back against the stone and quickly took inventory of his equipment. Standard ranger gear, first aid kit, emergency flares, water purification tablets, length of paracord, folding knife, fire starter, compass, emergency whistle, and his backup radio. Nothing that would be effective against what amounted to an alien killing machine. But Marcus had spent years teaching wilderness survival. And the first rule was simple. Work with what you have, not what you wish you had. You said you've been studying us for decades, Marcus called out, trying to pinpoint her location by the sound of her voice. Did your research include any humans who actually fought back? Your military forces? Yes, extensively. We are prepared for your projectile weapons, your explosive devices, your electronic warfare capabilities. Marcus smiled grimly. She was thinking like a technologist, focusing on hardware and organized forces. That was exactly the kind of narrow thinking that had gotten invasion forces in trouble throughout human history. I wasn't talking about the military, Marcus said, pulling out his paracord and quickly fashioning a slip knot. I was talking about individuals. People with nothing left to lose and no rules to follow. There was silence from the other side of the boulder, and Marcus realized he'd surprised her. Good. Surprise was a weapon he could use. Your individual humans are physically weak and poorly armed, Sarah said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. Yeah, Marcus agreed, testing the strength of his improvised snare. We're also completely unpredictable, irrationally stubborn, and creative in ways that apparently don't translate across species. He heard movement and tensed, ready to spring. Whatever happened next, he was going to make sure Sarah went back to her superiors with a very different report than the one she'd planned to write. The attack came faster than Marcus had expected. Sarah appeared around the edge of the boulder, moving like liquid lightning, her elongated arms reaching for him with those metallic claws extended. But Marcus had spent 15 years dealing with sudden dangers in the wilderness, and his reflexes were honed by countless encounters with rattlesnakes, falling trees, and unstable rock faces. He threw himself flat against the ground just as her claws whistled through the air where his chest had been, then rolled sideways and came up running. Behind him, he heard another shower of sparks as Sarah's momentum carried her into the granite wall. "Impressive reflexes for a primitive species," came her voice, now tinged with what might have been irritation. "But you cannot run forever." Marcus didn't intend to run forever. He was heading for a specific destination, a small clearing about 100 yards away where a lightning strike had brought down a massive old-growth pine 3 months ago. The fallen tree created a natural obstacle course that he knew intimately from his regular patrols. More importantly, the lightning had left behind something he could use. The sound of pursuit behind him was unlike anything he'd ever heard. Not quite footsteps, more like metal scraping against stone with each bound. Whatever Sarah really was, she was fast enough to close the distance between them in seconds if he made a mistake. Marcus vaulted over a fallen log and immediately cut hard to the left, using a technique he'd learned from watching elk evade predators. Straight line running was death against a faster opponent, but sudden direction changes could buy precious seconds. His gamble paid off. He heard a crash and what sounded like alien cursing as Sarah overshot his position and slammed into a tree trunk. The sound of splintering wood told him she'd hit hard enough to damage the tree itself. "Your evasion patterns are more sophisticated than anticipated," Sarah called out, her voice echoing strangely through the forest. "But you are still merely delaying an inevitable outcome." Marcus reached the lightning-struck clearing and immediately began searching the ground around the fallen pine. The massive tree had been split nearly in half by the electrical strike, and the intense heat had fused sand and rock into formations of natural glass. More importantly, it had left behind pieces of fulgurite, hollow tubes of glass created when lightning strikes sand or soil. He found what he was looking for, a piece about 18 inches long with a sharp, spear-like point. Fulgurite was incredibly hard and held an edge better than most metals. Ancient humans had used similar lightning glass for tools and weapons, and Marcus was about to find out if old techniques worked against new threats. "Found you," Sarah said, appearing at the edge of the clearing with that same fluid grace. Her alien form was now fully revealed, a 7-foot-tall fusion of organic curves and mechanical angles that hurt to look at directly. Her skin had the metallic sheen of liquid mercury, and her eyes glowed with an internal light that cast eerie shadows. "I was wondering how long it would take," Marcus said, gripping his improvised weapon behind his back. "Your species must be pretty confident to send scouts out alone." "We are not alone," Sarah replied, stepping into the clearing with predatory patience. "My ship maintains constant contact. If I fail to report within the designated time frame, additional forces will be dispatched to investigate." Marcus felt his heart sink, but kept his expression neutral. "How long do you have?" "Sufficient time to complete my evaluation and dispose of you," Sarah said. "Though I admit your performance has been more interesting than expected. Most test subjects either freeze with terror or attempt futile direct attacks. Your tactical thinking shows promise. Promise for what? Slave labor, perhaps? Or gladiatorial entertainment? My people have not yet decided what use your species might serve once we have taken your world." The casual tone in which she discussed the enslavement of humanity made Marcus's blood boil, but he channeled that anger into focus. Sarah was standing about 15 feet away, just outside the range of his improvised spear. He needed her closer, but rushing in would be suicide. "You mentioned that you've been studying our military capabilities," Marcus said, slowly backing toward the fallen pine while keeping his makeshift weapon hidden. "What about our survival skills? The things we do when we're desperate?" "Such as?" Sarah asked, following him with those glowing eyes tracking his every movement. "Such as the fact that humans have survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, floods, droughts, and every other natural disaster this planet could throw at us, not because we're the strongest or the fastest, but because we refuse to give up." Marcus reached the trunk of the fallen tree and seemed to stumble slightly, catching himself with one hand against the bark. To Sarah, it probably looked like he was tiring. In reality, he was feeling for the specific spot he needed. a section where the lightning strike had weakened the wood enough to create a potential leverage point. Admirable determination, but ultimately irrelevant against superior technology, Sarah said, moving closer. Your entire species will learn this lesson soon enough. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But here's something your research might have missed about humans. We're really good at making things explode. Before Sarah could react, Marcus brought the fulgurite spear around in a powerful arc. Not toward her, but toward the weakened section of tree trunk. The glass point struck the exact spot where lightning damage had created internal fractures, and 15 tons of pine trunk shifted suddenly as the remaining support gave way. The massive log rolled toward Sarah with surprising speed, forced by gravity and Marcus's understanding of simple physics. She leaped backward with alien agility, but Marcus had anticipated this. As she dodged the primary threat, he was already moving to her new position with the paracord snare he'd prepared earlier. The noose went around her ankle just as she landed, and Marcus yanked hard while diving away from her retaliatory swipe. Sarah went down hard, her inhuman form crashing into a cluster of smaller trees that splintered under her weight. Marcus didn't pause to admire his handiwork. He sprinted toward the thicker forest, using every technique he'd learned in 15 years of wilderness survival. Behind him, he could hear Sarah extricating herself from the debris with sounds like tearing metal and breaking glass. Clever. Her voice echoed through the trees, now carrying a note of genuine respect. Very clever indeed. You think like a predator, Marcus Chen. Perhaps my evaluation of your species requires revision. That didn't sound good. Marcus had been hoping to prove humans were more trouble than they were worth. But apparently, he'd just demonstrated that they were more capable than expected. That might make the invasion force larger rather than smaller. As he reached the deeper forest where ancient trees created a canopy thick enough to block satellite surveillance, Marcus made a decision. Running and hiding wouldn't save humanity. If Sarah's report was going to influence the invasion plans, he needed to make sure it told the right story. He needed to make sure she never made that report at all. Pulling out his emergency whistle, Marcus gave 3 short blasts, the universal signal for "I need help" that every ranger, hiker, and outdoor enthusiast knew. The sound echoed through the forest, and he knew it would draw Sarah directly to his location. Good. It was time to stop running and start hunting. Marcus crouched behind a massive cedar tree, listening to the forest around him with the focused intensity of a born hunter. The whistle blast had been a calculated risk. It would draw Sarah to him, but it would also alert any other rangers in the area to potential trouble. More importantly, it had forced him to stop thinking like prey and start thinking like a predator. The Cascade Mountains had been his territory for 15 years. He knew every deer trail, every water source, every patch of unstable ground, and every tree that might fall in a strong wind. Sarah might be faster and stronger, but she was operating in his environment now, and Marcus intended to use every advantage that gave him. The first rule of persistence hunting, the technique early humans had used to bring down mammoth and saber-toothed cats, was simple. Use your brain to overcome physical disadvantages. Humans weren't the fastest runners on the African savanna, but they were the smartest, and they never gave up. I heard your signal. Sarah's voice carried through the trees from about 50 yards to his south. Are you calling for help that will never come? Or perhaps attempting to warn others of my presence? Marcus didn't reply. Sound discipline was crucial now. He moved carefully through the undergrowth, using techniques learned from studying how native hunters had once moved through these same forests. Every step was placed deliberately, every branch moved aside slowly and released gently. Your radio communications are still blocked, Sarah continued, her voice moving east now as she searched for him. My ship's electronic warfare capabilities are quite advanced. Even if other humans respond to your whistle, they will be unable to call for additional support. That was useful information. Marcus filed it away while studying the terrain ahead. He was moving toward a section of forest he knew intimately, a series of steep ravines carved by centuries of snowmelt and rain. The ground there was treacherous even for someone who knew it well, and absolutely deadly for someone who didn't. I admit your performance has exceeded expectations, Sarah called out closer now. Initial intelligence suggested your species would be easily pacified through displays of superior force. You have demonstrated that individual humans may require more direct methods of control. Marcus smiled grimly as he reached the edge of Deadfall Ravine. The name wasn't subtle. Over the years, he'd pulled 3 bodies out of this particular canyon, all victims of overconfidence and poor footing. The walls were nearly vertical granite, slick with moss and constantly crumbling. The bottom was littered with broken stone and the remains of trees that had fallen from the rim over decades. More importantly, for Marcus's purposes, there were only 2 ways out once you went down. The narrow eastern trail that he'd helped mark with emergency rope 3 years ago, and the even more dangerous western route that required technical climbing gear. Your species appears to have an unusual capacity for environmental adaptation. Sarah's voice was very close now, maybe 20 yards behind him. This trait was not anticipated in our initial models. Marcus pulled out his emergency flares and quickly rigged them with paracord to create a tripwire system across the deer trail Sarah was following. The flares would do little damage to an alien, but the sudden bright light and noise might disorient her long enough for him to execute his plan. In fact, Sarah continued, your resourcefulness suggests that the conquest of Earth may require significantly more force than originally allocated. Perhaps a full battle fleet rather than the survey ships currently in position. Marcus froze. Survey ships, plural, currently in position. That meant the invasion was imminent, not months or years away. He had even less time than he'd thought to prevent Sarah from making her report. Moving with desperate speed, Marcus made his way to a specific spot along the ravine's edge, a section where frost had repeatedly cracked a massive granite boulder, until it was held in place by little more than gravity and wishful thinking. He'd been meaning to arrange for its safe removal, but budget constraints and other priorities had kept pushing it down his to-do list. Today, bureaucratic delays might save humanity. The tripwire flares detonated in sequence behind him, filling the forest with brilliant red light and the sharp crack of emergency pyrotechnics. Marcus heard what sounded like an alien scream of surprise and rage, followed by the crash of something large moving through the underbrush at high speed. Clever again. Sarah's voice carried a note of what might have been admiration along with anger. But you merely announce your location more precisely. Marcus pressed his back against the unstable boulder and waited. He could hear Sarah approaching through the trees, moving faster now and with less caution. Good. Speed was the enemy of careful observation, and careful observation was the only thing that might warn her about the trap he'd prepared. She emerged from the tree line like something from a nightmare, her metallic form reflecting the dying light of the emergency flares in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Her alien eyes swept the area methodically until they fixed on Marcus standing beside the ravine's edge. End of the line, Sarah said, stalking toward him with predatory grace. You have provided valuable data on human adaptability and resourcefulness. Your species will make excellent sport for our hunting parties. Hunting parties? Marcus asked, genuinely curious despite his terror. That's what this is about? One of many purposes Earth will serve, Sarah replied, now close enough that Marcus could see the inhuman intelligence burning behind those glowing eyes. Your world has abundant resources. Your species shows promise as both laborers and entertainment, and your military capabilities pose no meaningful threat to our technology. She was 10 feet away now, then 8, then 6. Marcus remained perfectly still, letting her approach while calculating angles and timing. But perhaps most valuable, Sarah continued, you have provided us with a perfect testing ground for our weapons and tactics. After the initial conquest, Earth will become a training world where our young learn the art of war against a species clever enough to be challenging, but primitive enough to be contained. Sounds like you've got it all figured out, Marcus said. Indeed. And you, Marcus Chen, will have the honor of being the first human to. Sarah stepped onto the section of rocky ground that Marcus had identified months ago as unstable, the same area where he'd posted warning signs that she hadn't noticed in her overconfidence. Her additional weight and momentum were exactly what the precarious granite boulder needed to finally obey the laws of physics. The massive stone shifted with a grinding roar that echoed across the ravine. Sarah had just enough time to look down in confusion before the ground beneath her feet gave way completely. She fell backward into Deadfall Ravine with a scream that sounded more like tearing metal than any human expression of fear. Marcus peered over the edge cautiously. Sarah lay at the bottom of the 60-foot drop, partially buried under loose stone and clearly injured. Her metallic skin was cracked in several places, leaking something that glowed like molten silver. But she was moving, trying to pull herself free of the debris. Physics, Marcus called down to her. One thing that works the same everywhere in the universe. Sarah looked up at him, and even from this distance, Marcus could see the hatred burning in her alien eyes. This changes nothing, she snarled. My ship will detect my distress beacon when I fail to report. They will come for you. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But by then, I'll have had time to prepare a proper welcome for them. He turned away from the ravine and began jogging toward the ranger station, his mind already racing through everything he knew about emergency communication procedures. If Sarah was right about the radio jamming, he'd need to get outside the interference zone to warn the world about what was coming. Behind him, he could hear Sarah's enraged shouts echoing from the canyon, but they were growing fainter with distance. For the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. The aliens might have superior technology, but they'd made a crucial error. They'd assumed that studying humanity's military and government would tell them everything they needed to know about the species. They were about to learn the difference between analyzing humans and understanding them. Marcus ran through the forest with the steady, ground-eating pace he'd learned from ultramarathon training. 3 miles to the ranger station, another 2 miles to the communication tower on Ridge Peak, assuming the aliens hadn't already disabled it. His lungs burned and his legs ached, but adrenaline and the knowledge that humanity's survival might depend on his next few hours kept him moving. The electromagnetic interference from Sarah's ship created an eerie dead zone in the forest. His GPS unit showed nothing but static. His radio remained completely silent, and even his digital watch had stopped working. It was like stepping back into the pre-electronic age. Except that primitive technology wasn't going to help him against an alien invasion fleet. As he crested a small hill, Marcus caught sight of something that made him stumble and nearly fall. The evening sky above Mount Cascade was wrong. Where there should have been empty air and maybe a few scattered clouds, strange lights flickered and pulsed in patterns that definitely weren't natural. They were too organized, too geometric, too purposeful. The invasion fleet was already here. Marcus forced himself to keep running while his mind raced through the implications. Sarah had said survey ships, plural. How many? What were their capabilities? And how long before they moved from reconnaissance to active conquest? The ranger station appeared through the trees, a reassuringly normal wooden building surrounded by solar panels and communication equipment. Marcus burst through the front door and immediately headed for the emergency communication system, a landline hardwired to the regional emergency services center that was, supposed to function even when all wireless systems failed. He grabbed the red phone and listened to the dial tone with relief. At least something was still working. Marcus dialed the emergency coordination number he'd memorized years ago and waited through several rings before a familiar voice answered. Emergency services. This is Director Walsh. Tom, it's Marcus Chen up at Cascade Station. We have a situation that... Marcus? Jesus, we've been trying to reach you for hours. Every radio and cell tower in your sector went dark around noon. Are you all right? Marcus looked through the window at the strange lights in the sky, now clearly visible as massive shapes moving against the stars. Tom, I need you to listen very carefully and not ask questions until I'm finished. We are under attack by an alien force. Real aliens, not a hoax or a drill. They've been infiltrating our society for months, maybe longer. I encountered one of their scouts about 4 hours ago. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus, have you hit your head? Are you experiencing any confusion or... Tom, Marcus interrupted. Look at the sky above Mount Cascade. Right now. Tell me what you see. Another pause, then the sound of footsteps and a door opening. When Tom spoke again, his voice had changed completely. What in the hell are those things? Alien survey ships. They're preparing to invade, and they've been studying us for months. I have intel on their capabilities and their plans, but we need to get this information to the military immediately. This is insane, Tom muttered, but Marcus could hear him typing rapidly. I'm looking at satellite feeds now. Jesus Christ, Marcus, there are similar formations over major cities worldwide. How did we not see this coming? Because they've been jamming our sensors and infiltrating our communications, Marcus said. Tom, I need you to contact General Morrison at Fort Lewis. Tell him we're dealing with a technologically superior force that's been conducting reconnaissance for months. They know our military capabilities and have countermeasures prepared. What about their weaknesses? Tom asked. You said you encountered one of their scouts. Are they vulnerable to anything? Marcus thought about Sarah trapped in the ravine, possibly still alive despite her injuries. They're physically tough but not invincible. More importantly, they're overconfident. They've been studying our military and government, but they don't understand individuals. They don't understand human creativity or our refusal to give up. Through the window, Marcus saw one of the lights detaching from the larger formation and descending toward the forest. It was heading in his general direction, probably searching for Sarah's signal. "Tom, I have to go. One of their ships is heading this way. Get word to the military. Tell them to focus on small unit tactics and unconventional warfare. Don't try to match their technology head-on." "Marcus, wait." Marcus hung up the phone and immediately headed for the equipment locker. He had maybe 10 minutes before the alien ship reached his position, and he intended to use every second. From the emergency supplies, he grabbed road flares, emergency beacon transmitters, first aid supplies, and a handheld GPS unit that might work once he got beyond the jamming field. Most importantly, he took the emergency satellite phone that was supposed to be used only for life or death situations. If this didn't qualify, nothing ever would. The approaching ship was clearly visible now, a sleek metallic craft about the size of a commercial airliner, but moving with the agility of a fighter jet. It swept back and forth across the forest in a search pattern, and Marcus realized it was probably tracking Sarah's location through some kind of internal beacon. He had an idea. Moving quickly, Marcus gathered every emergency flare in the station and began setting them up in a wide circle around the building. If the aliens were tracking Sarah's position, they'd expect to find her here. Instead, they'd find a human who'd had several hours to prepare for their arrival. The satellite phone crackled to life on the third attempt, finally connecting to a military communications satellite that was apparently beyond the alien jamming range. "This is an emergency," Marcus said when the connection went through. "I need immediate contact with NORAD or the Pentagon. We are under alien attack. Sir, this is a secure military frequency. If this is a prank, look at your radar screens," Marcus interrupted. "Check satellite feeds over major population centers. You'll see formations of unidentified aircraft that aren't showing up on conventional detection systems." There was typing, hurried conversation in the background, then a different voice came on the line, older, with the authority of someone used to making life and death decisions. "This is Colonel Hayes. Who am I speaking with?" "Marcus Chen, Wilderness Ranger, Cascade Mountains. I have direct intelligence on alien invasion forces and their capabilities. Stand by." More background noise, urgent voices, the sound of alerts being raised. When Colonel Hayes came back on the line, his tone had changed completely. "Mr. Chen, we're tracking multiple bogies worldwide. They appeared simultaneously about 30 minutes ago, and they're not responding to any communication attempts. What intelligence do you have?" Marcus looked out the window. The alien ship was less than a mile away now, sweeping closer with each pass. "They've been infiltrating human society for months, studying our military capabilities and social structures. They know our weapons, our tactics, our command structure, but they've underestimated individual humans." "Explain." "They think in terms of technology and organized force," Marcus said, beginning to light the emergency flares in sequence. "They don't understand human adaptability or our ability to use the environment as a weapon. They've prepared for conventional warfare, not guerrilla tactics." The first flares ignited with brilliant red light, followed quickly by the others. Within seconds, the ranger station was surrounded by a ring of fire that would be visible for miles. "Mr. Chen, are you in immediate danger?" Marcus watched the alien ship change course directly toward his position. "Yes, sir, but I'm prepared for it." "Colonel, pass this along to whoever's making tactical decisions. These aliens are like any other invasive species. They're adapted for their home environment, not ours. Use that against them." "Understood." "Mr. Chen, the satellite phone died as the alien ship passed overhead, its electronic warfare systems overwhelming even the hardened military frequencies." But Marcus had gotten his message through, and that was what mattered. He grabbed his gear and headed for the back door of the station. The aliens were expecting to find Sarah here, and when they discovered she was missing, they'd probably search the immediate area. That would give him time to implement the next phase of his plan. As Marcus disappeared into the forest, he allowed himself a grim smile. Sarah had been right about one thing: humans were an adaptable species. What she hadn't understood was that adaptability worked both ways. The aliens were about to get their first real lesson in why apex predators should never underestimate prey that can think. From his concealed position in the dense undergrowth 200 yards from the ranger station, Marcus watched three figures emerge from the alien craft. They moved with the same fluid grace as Sarah, but these were clearly different, taller, with more angular features and what looked like integrated technological implants along their arms and necks. The ship itself was a masterpiece of alien engineering, its hull seeming to bend light around it in ways that made it difficult to focus on directly. When it landed, it made no sound and left no visible disturbance in the grass. These beings had technology that was centuries, maybe millennia, ahead of human capabilities. But as Marcus observed their search pattern, he noticed something interesting. They were being methodical but predictable, following a grid search that any first-year military academy student would recognize. Their technology might be advanced, but their tactical thinking seemed oddly conventional. The aliens spent several minutes examining the ring of flares, clearly puzzled by their purpose. One of them, apparently the leader based on more elaborate implants, touched some kind of device on its arm and began speaking in a language that sounded like metal, grinding against glass. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakably one of confusion and growing concern. Sarah was supposed to be here and she wasn't. That was disrupting their carefully planned operation. Good. The leader gestured toward the surrounding forest, and the three aliens spread out to begin searching. Their movements were swift and efficient, but they stayed on established trails and clearings. They weren't adapting to the environment. They were trying to impose their preferred tactics on unfamiliar terrain. Marcus smiled grimly and began moving through the forest using techniques learned from both military survival, training, and wildlife observation. He stayed low, moved slowly, and used natural cover to mask his presence. Every few hundred yards, he stopped to observe the alien search pattern and adjust his route accordingly. His destination was a small emergency cache, hidden about a mile from the ranger station. Every ranger maintained several such caches throughout their territory, sealed containers with basic supplies that could mean the difference between life and death in an emergency. This particular cache contained items that might prove useful against technologically advanced opponents. Military-grade smoke grenades left over from a search and rescue training exercise. Emergency radio beacons that operated on frequencies different from standard communications, and a small amount of thermite compound used for emergency signaling. As Marcus reached the cache, his satellite phone crackled back to life. Apparently he'd moved beyond the range of the alien jamming field. Mr. Chen, this is Colonel Hayes. Can you hear me? Yes, sir, I'm here. We've been tracking the craft in your area. Our satellites show it landed at your station about 20 minutes ago. What's your status? I'm observing three aliens conducting a search operation. They're looking for their missing scout, the one I mentioned earlier. Their search patterns are predictable, and they seem to prefer easy terrain over difficult. Understood. Mr. Chen, I need you to know that we're seeing similar alien activities worldwide. They've landed scouts near major military installations and population centers. We believe this is preparation for a larger assault. Marcus opened the emergency cache and began sorting through its contents. Colonel, what's the military response? Mixed results. Conventional attacks are being countered or absorbed by their defensive systems. But we've had some success with unconventional tactics, small unit operations, environmental hazards, attacks on isolated scouts rather than their main force. That confirmed what Marcus had suspected. The aliens had prepared for human military doctrine as they understood it, but they hadn't accounted for human creativity and adaptability. Sir, I have a theory about their weakness, Marcus said, rigging one of the smoke grenades with a tripwire. They think like engineers, not like warriors. They're solving the invasion as a technical problem, not understanding that humans fight with more than just technology. Explain that. Mr. Chen, they've studied our weapons and tactics, but they haven't studied our psychology. They don't understand that humans can turn anything into a weapon, our environment, our desperation, our refusal to accept defeat. They're fighting the war they prepared for, not the war they're actually in. Marcus moved to a second position and began setting up another trap. The aliens were methodical, but their method was predictable. If he could establish a pattern of harassment, he might be able to channel them into terrain more favorable to his purposes. Colonel, I'm going to attempt to capture or disable one of the aliens in my area. If I can get you intelligence on their technology or biology, would that be useful? Extremely useful, Mr. Chen. But are you sure you want to attempt that? You're dealing with unknown capabilities. Marcus thought about Sarah lying injured at the bottom of Deadfall Ravine. I've already proven they're not invincible. They just think they are. The satellite phone crackled with static as one of the alien ships passed overhead, but the signal cleared quickly. Mr. Chen, I'm authorized to tell you that resistance activities are beginning worldwide. Your early warning allowed us to coordinate with Allied forces before the aliens could establish complete communication dominance. What kind of resistance? Everything from organized military responses to individual civilians using improvised weapons. A group of hunters in Montana took down an alien scout with hunting rifles and bear traps. Farmers in Kansas disabled a ship with agricultural chemicals. A demolitions expert in Denver collapsed a tunnel system they were using as a base. Marcus felt a surge of fierce pride. Humanity was doing what it did best, adapting, improvising, and refusing to surrender. The aliens seemed genuinely surprised by the scope and creativity of human resistance, Colonel Hayes continued. Your assessment appears correct. They prepared for a conventional war but got something completely different. Through the trees, Marcus could see the aliens regrouping near their ship. Their search had apparently found no trace of Sarah, and they were clearly frustrated by the failure. The leader was gesturing angrily while speaking into its communication device. Colonel, it looks like the aliens in my area are preparing to expand their search. I'm going to see if I can make that more difficult for them. Be careful, Mr. Chen, and maintain communication if possible. Your intelligence has been invaluable. Marcus disconnected the call and began moving toward the alien's position. His improvised traps were in place, his escape routes were planned, and he had a psychological advantage the aliens didn't know about. He was no longer afraid of them. Fear was what predators used to paralyze their prey. But Marcus had already faced the worst these aliens could throw at him and survived. Now he was going to show them why humans had conquered a planet full of creatures bigger, stronger, and better armed than themselves. The aliens wanted to hunt humans for sport. Fine. But first they were going to learn what it felt like to be hunted by an apex predator that had evolved not just to survive, but to turn every disadvantage into a weapon. As Marcus reached the edge of the clearing where the alien ship waited, he pulled the pin on his first smoke grenade and prepared to give Earth's invaders a lesson in human warfare they'd never forget. The smoke grenade detonated with a sharp crack, instantly filling the clearing with dense white smoke that reduced visibility to mere feet. Marcus heard the aliens' harsh voices rise in surprise and confusion as their advanced sensors apparently struggled to penetrate the simple chemical fog. But Marcus wasn't relying on technology. He was using the same techniques that had allowed his ancestors to hunt mammoth across the frozen steppes: patience, cunning, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. He moved through the smoke like a ghost, following a mental map of the clearing that he'd built during hundreds of routine patrols. 3 steps to the fallen log, 5 more to the boulder, then angle left toward the stream. The aliens were calling to each other in their metallic language, and from the sound of their voices, they were bunching together, a classic mistake when dealing with limited visibility. The second smoke grenade went off on the far side of the clearing, followed quickly by the third. Now the entire area was shrouded in overlapping clouds of concealment, and the aliens' technological advantages were neutralized by something as simple as burning chemicals. Marcus heard the distinctive whine of alien energy weapons powering up, followed by brilliant flashes of light cutting through the smoke. They were firing blind, hoping to hit him through volume rather than accuracy, but their shots went high and wide, striking trees and rocks while Marcus stayed low and kept moving. The satellite phone in his pocket vibrated twice, the signal Colonel Hayes had arranged to indicate important updates. Marcus ignored it for now. He had work to finish. Moving by sound and memory, Marcus approached the position where he'd last heard the alien leader. The creature was speaking rapidly into its communication device, probably calling for reinforcements or reporting the loss of their scout. Marcus couldn't allow that report to be completed. He found the alien exactly where he'd expected, standing in the middle of what it thought was concealment, focused entirely on its technology instead of its immediate environment. The creature was tall and imposing, with integrated circuits running along its elongated limbs like metal tattoos, but it was standing in exactly the wrong place. Marcus had noticed. during his earlier observation that this particular spot was directly downhill from an unstable rock formation, another geological hazard he'd been meaning to address. When budget and time permitted, today, emergency maintenance was going to save the world. The thermite compound ignited with a brilliant white flash that burned through the aliens' personal shields like they weren't there. More importantly, the intense heat cracked the already weakened stone above, sending a cascade of granite fragments tumbling down the hillside. The alien leader looked up just in time to see several tons of rock bearing down on it. It tried to leap clear, but the loose stone beneath its feet gave way, and the creature went down under an avalanche that Marcus had triggered with nothing more than basic chemistry and gravity. The remaining two aliens converged on their leader's position, their weapons sweeping frantically through the smoke. But Marcus was already gone, circling around to implement the next phase of his plan. His satellite phone vibrated again, more urgently this time. Marcus risked a quick check of the display and saw a text message from Colonel Hayes. Global resistance successful. Alien forces withdrawing. Your intel crucial. Status? Marcus smiled grimly as he prepared his final trap. The aliens had come to Earth expecting to face a primitive species armed with chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles. Instead, they'd encountered 7 billion individual humans, each one capable of turning their environment into a weapon. The remaining aliens had found their leader buried under tons of rock and were attempting some kind of technological resurrection. Beams of energy played over the debris while they spoke in increasingly agitated tones to their communication devices. Marcus struck the emergency beacon he'd retrieved from the cache, sending out a distress signal on frequencies that every rescue service in the Pacific Northwest would recognize. Within minutes, he could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching. Not alien craft, but human aircraft coming to investigate the emergency beacon. The aliens heard it too. They abandoned their leader and began moving toward their ship, clearly deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. But Marcus had one more surprise for them. The paracord stretched across their path was nearly invisible in the dissipating smoke, rigged at exactly ankle height and anchored to trees on both sides of their escape route. The first alien hit it at full stride and went down hard, its technological implants sparking against the rocky ground. The second alien tried to leap over its fallen companion, but landed badly on the loose stone Marcus had scattered across the area. As it struggled to regain its balance, Marcus stepped out of the smoke with the fulgurite spear he'd used against Sarah. Surrender, Marcus said calmly. Your invasion has failed. The alien raised its energy weapon, but Marcus was already moving. The glass spear took its center mass, and the creature's personal shields overloaded with a shower of sparks. It collapsed beside its companion, both aliens alive but clearly incapacitated. The sound of helicopters grew louder as military aircraft joined the rescue vehicles. Marcus activated his satellite phone and contacted Colonel Hayes. Colonel, this is Marcus Chen. I have 2 alien prisoners and 1 KIA. The scout ship is intact and ready for examination. Outstanding work. Mr. Chen, I have updates from the global situation. The alien survey fleet attempted simultaneous assaults on major population centers worldwide. They were expecting organized military resistance and instead encountered widespread civilian insurgency, using improvised weapons and local environmental hazards. Marcus looked at the alien ship, its sleek hull now seeming somehow less intimidating. What kind of casualties? Surprisingly light on our side. Heavy on theirs. Turns out their personal shields and armor are designed to counter energy weapons and conventional explosives. They're not effective against falling rocks, industrial chemicals, electrified fences, or hunting arrows. A group of teenagers in Tokyo disabled an entire alien squad with paintball guns loaded with concrete mix. The first military helicopter was circling overhead now, and Marcus could see repelling equipment being prepared. Are they retreating? Full withdrawal. Their command ship transmitted a general recall signal about 30 minutes ago. We're tracking their departure vector, but they're moving faster than our fastest interceptors. Marcus walked over to examine the captured aliens more closely. Up close, their technology was even more impressive. Circuitry that seemed to be grown rather than manufactured, materials that shifted and flowed like living metal, weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. But for all their technological advancement, they'd made the same mistake that every successful predator species eventually made. They'd become overspecialized. "Colonel, I think we just witnessed evolution in action," Marcus said. "These aliens adapted to fight other technological species. They're like wolves trying to hunt humans, individually superior in every measurable way, but completely unprepared for prey that uses tools and teamwork. Your assessment matches what we're seeing globally, Mr. Chen. It appears that human unpredictability and environmental adaptation are genuine advantages, not just romantic notions." The military team was on the ground now, surrounding the alien ship and securing the prisoners. Marcus handed over his improvised weapons to the team leader and stepped back to let the experts take over. As he watched soldiers and scientists begin their examination of alien technology, Marcus felt his satellite phone buzz with another message. This one was from the Regional Emergency Coordinator. "Global threat neutralized. All stations return to normal operations." "Good work, normal operations." Marcus laughed despite everything. After today, he wasn't sure anything would ever be normal again. Humanity now knew it wasn't alone in the universe, and apparently it wasn't the weakest species either. The aliens had come to Earth expecting to find primitive prey. Instead, they discovered that humans were something much more dangerous, an adaptive predator species that could turn any environment into a hunting ground. Marcus looked up at the evening sky, now clear of alien ships but somehow changed forever. Somewhere out there, the surviving invaders were returning to their homeworld with a very different report than the one they'd planned to deliver. Earth wasn't a world to be conquered. It was a world that conquered back. And if the aliens ever decided to return, they'd find 7 billion humans who'd had time to prepare for round 2. Marcus smiled and headed toward his ranger station to write up the most unusual incident report in human history.